All right, hello there. So what this is going to be a series of videos going into the Programming Digital Media course set up through the LSU STEM Pathways. And what this is going to be going is we're going to be mainly using the P5 web editor and JavaScript to go over different ways of using code creatively. So we'll be doing several things with graphics, with sound, a little bit of other things as well, but those are kind of the main sections. So before I get too much into this, I do want to point out that there is the accompanying online textbook here. In fact, if I just go back to the main page here, we have it here at pdm.lsupathways.org. And what this is essentially just an online accompanying textbook covering all of the topics that will be covered in this course. So if you scroll down through it, there's a table of contents, all of the main stuff. Right here, you can go into the different sections, through all of that to get a better idea as to what's going on. I'm going to more or less be using this kind of as a guide for how we go through things. So my first video here is going to try to go through these first few chapters right here in the book, just to kind of introduce everyone to what is going on here in the program. All right. So I'll have that there. If we go into the website here where we will be doing most of the coding, it is editor.p5js.org. Okay, and this is kind of the default screen that pops up. Now what I recommend everyone doing is going right over here to log in or sign up. If you hit sign up, you can create a username. You need an email, password. If you happen to have a Google account or a GitHub, you can log in with those information credentials as well. But basically, you want to make an account. I already have one, so I'm going to just log in. It's going to autofill my stuff. You notice it has changed colors. You can adjust that in the settings here. I set it to high contrast. I just think it's easier to see everything in that regard, but it's totally up to you exactly how you want it to look. If you can click dark, changes it just a little bit. Light is that white screen we saw by default. Again, I'm going to leave it on high contrast just compared to the dark one. I think it's a little easier to see everything. All right. So that's there. So what exactly is this? So this is an online-based code editor. Okay, so you can write out all of your JavaScript code that we'll be doing in this window right here, the editor window, and it will store it on the P5 server. So you won't actually be taking up any storage space on your devices, which is one of the big pluses of this whole program. You can then access all of your previous projects right here through this website, which is why you wanted to make an account, because then it will have a place to store all of your projects. Okay, so we have that there. I'm going to click on this window here and say that inside of each kind of project that you start up, you have a few different files set up by default. The first is the JavaScript file, sketch.js is the name that P5 gives them, and that stores all of the JavaScript. This is kind of the meat and potatoes of everything in your project. All right, this is what does all of the work, as we'll find out the more we do this. The next one, the index.html, is just kind of the supporting structure that supports everything that happens in the JavaScript file. So this is basically just telling our program, because it's all hosted online, it has to go and say, hey, find the information so that P5 can work, and that's essentially what it's saying here. We won't start off by doing a whole lot with this file, but later on in the course we'll be adding some things here, just like we have kind of structured here, in order to add additional functionality to the program, but we'll get into that when we get there. The last part here is this style.css, and this file essentially just tells the program how to look. For the context of this course, we really won't be doing really anything with it, but know that if you wanted to adjust how some of the stuff looks on the web page, you can always adjust the CSS file. So if I were to kind of relate these all to each other, I would say that this index.html is like a mannequin. You know, it's the kind of the supporting structure that if you don't have this, nothing really works. You can't see anything. The style sheet is like putting clothes onto the mannequin. You know, it makes it look nice, makes it look pretty. And then the sketch.js file is like the magic fairy godmother that turns the mannequin from, you know, being a mannequin into a real boy. So it actually, you know, does all of the stuff. So that's kind of the three main files we have there. Later on in the course, we'll be adding additional files here that we'll be able to reference in our code, so that way we can use audio recordings or images and things like that. But we'll get to that later. All right, so what else do we see here? Up at the top, we have a few options. If you click on the file, you have options for new file, saving your files, opening ones, and they have a few built-in examples. I'm going to go ahead and save this file. Boom, it says set sketch save, auto save enabled. And then you notice that it added this by Imbarden here. So that's my account name. Whatever you want to name your account as, it will change it for right there. So you can change the name here. And in fact, I always recommend updating the name. Just change that right there, because by default it sets it to a random adjective and a random noun as a default naming scheme, which is fine to just put a placeholder item there. But if you don't have anything, you know, to identify what this is, then there's no reason for you to know what's what. So you'll get a bunch of files with no name that you just won't know what's happening. All right, and if you notice, I hovered right over my name here. It turned yellow. It highlighted. You can click on that, and it'll take you to every single one of your sketches. So if you're like me and have a fair bit of sketches saved to your P5 account, well, then, like I said, having these names that are a little bit hard to figure out what they are, that just becomes problematic. So we have that there. You can create collections of multiple projects, multiple sketches, all in one spot. So that's there, and then you can load in your pictures and sound files here as well to use in your projects. Now, keep in mind that you have a max of 250 megabytes per account, which is not a lot of space. We'll get into that a little bit later when we start actually doing that, but you can see where all these are and what sketch they're in. So again, that's all right there. I'm just going to hit back to editor. Under edit, they have a few things. They all have shortcuts here. Get into some of that. Most of it's just finding stuff, but this tidy code, if you'll see me do a few times, it's very useful. Just lines everything up, makes it easy to see. Under sketch, you can add files, add folders of files, run and stop it. There's some shortcuts there, but you can just use these buttons. That's what I usually do. And then the help, you have the list of all the keyboard shortcuts, the reference, and then just the about P5. I'm going to open up this reference here because this will be one of your best tools for if you have something you're not 100% sure how to do in P5. So if you pull this up here, we get this tab. All right, and there's a lot of information here. You can click on one of these links to jump right to a section, but then under each section, there's at least one or usually more subheadings of different categories. So if we scroll down a bit, I'll just kind of pick one. Okay, math. We have some stuff here, and this is every function built into P5 that has to do with, in this case, math calculations or vectors or dealing with noise, things with random numbers or trigonometry, things like that. So if you click on one, let's click on random, that's a function, and it'll take you to the reference page for random. And there's a few code examples so you can see how it was used. And we'll get into what exactly is happening here, but it's just some different contexts for how you can use random. If you scroll down, there'll be a description saying what is happening in the function. And then you have the syntax here, so when you type it, what the function is and what you would type in the parentheses here if it needs anything. And then it explains what these parameters are right underneath here. And then if you get a value back from your function, it'll say what it is right there. So in this case, you could, if you wanted to have a random number, you could say pick a random number between these two values that you type here. Or you could give it a list of things to choose from. And it will give you back this number. Again, that's just in a nutshell. We'll talk more about random as we go along, but I just wanted to use that to introduce this idea of the reference page. It's all right there. If you want to get back to your editor, you can check stuff here. There's different things you can download and other stuff you can check out right here. But again, we won't get too much into that. Okay, so that's all of the tabs up top. That's all of the files here. What else do we have on the screen? We have the run and pause buttons, and these are just for running your codes. I'll get to that in a second. The auto refresh, what this will do is whenever you start typing in the editor window right here, whenever there's a change, the code will attempt to refresh and rerun itself. That's usually a good thing, but when we do certain items, you'll definitely want to make sure that this box is not ticked. Because sometimes you could accidentally write yourself into a bit when you've actually locked up your computer because it's trying to run this code, but the code isn't finished yet, so it doesn't work, which could be very problematic. So for now, I'll go ahead and leave it on, and we'll see how this changes. All right, so now that we've kind of gone through all of the main sections that are on this screen, for the most part, we haven't talked about the console or the preview window yet. We're going to get to that. Let's start actually doing stuff. So in this window here, you can type. In fact, if I go down and you can start typing some stuff. You know, it's just with my random numbers here, we get this highlighted. We kind of get an error because this isn't anything. The computer doesn't know what to do with that. So I'm going to just get rid of it because, again, the computer won't know what to do. So I want to point out a few things that kind of go into the structure of JavaScript encoding. That is, we have this yellow word here. That's kind of identifying what this block of code is going to do. So this is going to be a function. That means that this section of code is going to have a very specific task that it's going to be doing. It's going to be called function setup. And the way function setup works is it just sets up all of the stuff needed for your project. And then we have a set of an opening and close curly brace. And if you click next to it with your cursor, it'll actually highlight the pair of braces. So the computer will say this brace is matched up with this one. So you need to make sure that whenever you have an opening brace or opening parentheses, you always have a closing one there. That'll be very important later on, and I feel that most of the errors you'll likely to get are just because you have an opening and closed pair that doesn't match up. Either you have one too many of the opening pair or one too many of the closed, and they don't line up how you want them to. So that's a very helpful tool that they kind of highlight, and you can see that they're matched up. So everything that happens within these braces is inside of this function setup, and that's what's called kind of a code block. All right, it's this section of code. So if I were to, fill this up with a bunch of stuff here, it would be a visible block of code on the screen. All right. Inside it, by default, we only have the create canvas function. And you'll notice it has two numbers listed inside of the parentheses, which is a little bit different than the function we have up here. I'll get to that in just a second. So we have setup here, and underneath that we have draw. Draw is kind of what does a lot of the stuff, at least visually, in P5. Unlike setup that happens one time when the program is going just to help set up all of the stuff that needs to happen beforehand, draw is happening continuously. So it's going to keep going over and over again, and it's essentially going to loop. You'll sometimes hear me or other people refer to this as the draw loop. That's because the computer is just going to repeat this over and over again. By default, it happens about 60 times a second. You can adjust that, and we'll do that a little bit later on in some other lessons, but that is an option. You can adjust exactly how fast that goes. In this case, we have the background function as the only thing in draw by default. Again, we can go in and we can add some things later on, and we will. In fact, even in this video, we will. And again, it has a single number. So each of these functions here have a specific set of rules for what these numbers that they can have typed in here mean and how they're used. If you want to check those out, you can just search it in the reference. In fact, if I just go to the main reference page and type in background, it pulls up in the background page, and it will tell you about all the different things you can type in these parentheses and how they work, and all of that. I'm not going to go into it in this video, but it is there. All right. So we have all of that. So basically what's happening is the setup is going to create a canvas. This canvas is going to be like a window that we can see and interact with on the screen. And in fact, if you were to run this code on a website, in some way, this canvas is what you would be able to see on that website. So anything not on the canvas wouldn't be visible in your code. The background is what's going to set the give the canvas a background and give it a specific color. In this particular case, it's going to be a kind of grayish off-white. Basically what's happening here is we're typing in one number, so we're saying if it was 0, it would be all the way to black. If it was 255, it would be all the way to white. So we're a little bit closer to the white end than the black, but it's still going to be kind of gray. We'll be able to see that in just a second. These numbers here inside of Create Canvas tell us how wide and tall to make it. When we're entering in numbers for the sizes or positions of objects on the screen, it's always going to be the horizontal first and then the vertical. That's just how it's coded. So if I click this run button, you'll see that we get this kind of very light gray screen here. And it is a perfect square because these are the same numbers. But what are these numbers? They're the amount of pixels on the screen that we are. So we starting up here in this corner, right here, always starts from the top left corner. And it's basically saying make a canvas that is a rectangle and make it 400 pixels wide by 400 pixels tall on your screen. So if you have a screen with a much lower resolution, this will appear much bigger because there's more physical space between all of the pixels. And if you have something that's very high definition, it may appear a little bit smaller because 400 pixels will take up less space. So you could try that out on different monitors with different resolutions and see the difference there. Okay. So just to show that, we can go in and adjust these numbers. And if I change this to 255, like I mentioned, you'll notice that's a little more white now, but if I change that to 25, it updates and it's almost black. In fact, I'm just going to make this 100. And there we go. We can kind of see it's this very dark gray now. And that's, again, adjusting that from all the way black to all the way white along the gray scale is how this is set up by default. I want to take this moment and point out the semicolons. At the end of each line of code, you need to place a semicolon. Think of it like at the end of each time you're telling the computer to do something, you need a semicolon to say, and this is the end of this instruction to follow. So function setup, create the canvas, stop. Next thing, stop. Next thing, stop. Function, set the background, stop. Next thing, stop, stop, stop. Now, one thing that is helpful is that P5 will still work even if you don't always have the semicolon, but other programs will not. So I always advocate just make sure you always have it. You may not get an error in this program if you happen to forget your semicolon, but in other programs and editors, you definitely will. So it's just a little bit of it trying to be user friendly. But again, never forget the semicolons. Just like never forgetting if you have an open parenthesis, never forget the close. Whenever you have an open brace, never forget the close. Whenever you finish a line of code, never forget the semicolon. All right. As we go on and you see more code, it'll become second nature. So we can adjust the size of the canvas from the default. So if I wanted to make this 800 by 600, do that. And since we have auto refresh on, since we've changed this will automatically update the size of our canvas. If I have this unticked and put it back to 400, you notice it doesn't automatically update, and we have to hit the rerun button in order to see any changes. So I have that there. I also want to point out that if you see this little dot here by your name, that just means that your file has had changes since it was last saved. So you can just save it, and boom, it'll save your sketch to the P5 server, and there you go. All right. So what exactly is this canvas here? I've mentioned that it's the part of the screen where you can see and interact with stuff, and that it's built by a line of pixels says to go across horizontally and then vertically. That's true. Whenever you're making something on the canvas, it's always going to start here and build it this way, and then go down to the next line and next line and next line and so on for the whole canvas. This is where we can put things on our screen in order to see them. So I'm going to actually do that with a very basic function. It's going to be called rect. And this will draw a rectangle at our spot. Now at the moment we are getting an error, so I guess I will mention this. I'm sorry, I said it happens 60 times a second. It happens 30 times, it looks like. Anyways, so it says that rect was expecting at least 4 arguments but received only 0. And this is happening in the console, which is where that you can either have automatic messages come to you from P5 to look at, or you can program your code to give you back messages. And that's very useful for figuring out what's working and what's not, but we'll have a whole separate lesson on the console later. That's just there. Sometimes these messages are very helpful. Sometimes they take a little bit of practice to decipher. So it's saying it needs at least 4 arguments but received only 0. Now, what does it mean by arguments? Well, arguments are the name for these pink numbers we have here that we're typing inside of the parentheses. And what they are, they're essentially values that we're giving into the code. So we're saying in the rect function, and if you were to go into the backbone of P5 into its JavaScript file, it would tell, here's exactly how it builds a function, but it needs at least 4 specific numbers in order to do anything. But right now it only has 0, so that's why we're getting this error back. So what are these functions? Well, they are the X and Y position of the rectangle from where we want to start to draw it, and then how wide and tall to make the shape. So let me just type that out first and then explain it. So let's say 100, I'll just say 100, 200, 150. All right, so now we have this there. So like I mentioned, with rectangles in the canvas, things always start by default in this top left corner of the canvas. So what these points are is the top left corner of this shape. So we've said put it 100 pixels over and 200 pixels down. And that's where this corner of the shape is. Next, we want you to make the shape 100 pixels wide and 50 pixels tall. So that's this corner of the shape. And then the computer will fill it in based on that math. So you can adjust the position of the shape by changing these first 2 numbers. If I made this 200, 200, it would shoot it over there. If I made it 2100, it would still draw the shape. That's a typo, but now it's drawing it way over here, past the border of the canvas, so we can't actually see it. If we wanted to make this 100, 100, it would put it right there. if I wanted to adjust the size of it, say 150 by 250 or 550, again, it's drawing it farther than the canvas is, but it cuts off at the end of the canvas. I'm just say 250. Anyway, we can adjust the size and position of the shape by adjusting the specific arguments that we are typing as a list into this function. So that's there. So you can go in and just adjust the position of certain items on the canvas using that right there. So that'll be kind of the main focus of the first bit of doing things in this course with graphics. Will be, setting in the basic shapes, using the different positions on the canvas. Remember that it's always going to be the x coordinate first, so how between 0, which is over here horizontally, and whatever the width of the canvas is here, so that's the range of numbers. In this case it is 400 for placing things horizontally, followed by the vertical, which again the top is 0, and the maximum where you could still see something is this second number here, so between 0 and 400 by default. There, so we'll have different functions that we'll place. The rectangle we showed for starters. There's also the there's circles and ovals and triangles, and then you can make some custom shapes as well that we'll get into in this course. Again, this is just kind of a basic introduction, so I'm not going to dive too much into any of them, but that's essentially it. But I do want to point out a few minor things before we get too much into this. At the beginning-ish of this video, I mentioned that the setup function happens one time whenever you start running your code, and the draw function happens over and over and over again. So you need to, when you're putting all of your shapes and assigning these coordinates based off of the canvas here, you need to type it inside of the draw function, or else you won't see it. If I were to copy this and paste it inside of setup, you notice it appeared for just a second, but then since our draw function has us putting a new background over the canvas, it's there, but it's got covered up. So it's almost like you're creating a real-time flip book of different things. And this will come in handy a little bit later when we start having images that move and animate. But yeah, I just want to point that out. If you start typing out your shapes and start adjusting the positions and you don't see it, just make sure that it's in the right function. So you want to put these inside of draw. All right, so I'll put that there. One other thing that's important is that the computer will read this from top to bottom inside of each function. So right now it's drawing the background first and then drawing the rectangle. If I were to change the orders of this, and just if I copy that again and put it on top, we're not going to see anything different because it's drawing the rectangle and then putting the background on the canvas on top of it. So we just aren't actually seeing it. So again, if you know you're in draw but you still don't see any of your stuff show up, check that it's happening after the background function. Other than that, just again, another troubleshooting thing, make sure that you have your code is running, so this little play button is highlighted. If you get that error that we saw when I typed in things where we didn't have enough arguments, again, that'll say that it's expecting those 4 values, so that X and Y position of that top left corner, and then how wide and tall to draw the shape from that point there. So again, it'll say it's expecting at least 4 arguments, but received only so many. So again, I'll just put these all to 100. So we have that there. So kind of what I want to leave y'all with is to have this here and just kind of experiment a little bit, try changing the size of the canvas to different values, different amounts of pixels horizontally and vertically. Try changing the background color here. You could try adding additional numbers and see what that does. We didn't really get into that, but I'll talk about that more later. I'll put this back on the default of 220. And then try moving and adjusting your rectangle to different positions and different sizes, just to see what kind of things you can do. And then if that is going well, try adding one more rectangle. You just type out rect and then give it the different set of values. So if I wanted to say, I'll make this all 200. There we are. So now we've got this one over here, like that. So kind of the next thing, I'll start talking about a little bit more advanced stuff you can do, just getting used to all of this as we go along. So this is just kind of a basic introduction to working in the P5 editor window, all the different elements that you can see here and here, all that stuff. We have the preview window with our canvas, and that's just a real-time rendering of our code that we type in the code editor. Our console can give us messages back from the computer, all that stuff. But I'll talk more about all this later on in the next video. So thank you very much. Have a nice day, and I will see you in the next